You mentioned the interracial structure of the church. Do you feel that segregation had an effect on you personally?
I, of course it did. The mere fact when I was born and where I was born. But I don't believe it had, well, it had a negative effect upon what I could do and what I couldn't do, of course, in many areas of my life. But it didn't prevent me from trying to make the most of my own life and do what I think I should do in my career. For instance, in 1955, I was working for a independent record company, and we had a big country star, a country record, a guy named Slim Whitman, which you've never heard of, but he had a lot of records. We also had a young man out of New Orleans who was becoming, I handled all of his national promotion, named Fats Domino. And I had a young kid, 16-year-old kid from L.A., that he and his dad and his brother and his mother had a big TV show named Rick Nelson. So I handled all the national promotion and sales for these artists. But the thing I want to point out to you, in 1955, I would take Slim Whitman, a country artist. I would go into Provo, Utah, Oregon City, Oregon, Rock Island, Illinois, promoting a country record store. Here is this black national promotion man promoting this country artist. Now, if I had let the early discrimination that I experienced in my life, let it become a negative to me, I would have never have done that. The reason I did it is because it was important to me in my work. It's important. It's important to me to promote an artist that I had, regardless of what kind of artist he was. And where I had to take him, I took him. So those kinds of things. The segregation, early discrimination did not affect me.
Good. Tell us more about your position. Being a high-level executive, at times you had to take care of many different groups of artists, and no doubt some of them were different races. What was that like?
In my entire music career. See, first, let me tell you where I started from. My first job in the industry was as a stock boy. I don't know whether you know what that is or not. That's the guy, he's the low man on the totem pole in the shipping department. He does whatever no one else wants to do. You know, like pack the box, unpack the boxes, and put them on trucks and things of that nature. I'd started with this job in 1945 with Decca Record Distributing Company in Milwaukee. And when I went to Los Angeles, I started with a country label, distributor that promoted country music. And by that time, I'd worked myself up to assistant shipping clerk. And I left that job after a while and went to an independent record company on Santa Monica Boulevard. The reason I'm mentioning Santa Monica Boulevard is because LA City College was 2 blocks away. So I decided to go back to school. So I went to LA City College at night, and I worked as a shipping clerk for Aladdin Records that had a lot of stars of that era. Charles Brown, Amos Milburn, had a lot of big R&B stars. And they also distributed a label that had concerts by Billie Holiday, Nat King Cole, and other jazz artists. I went to school at night for 3.5 years, and I got my degree, AA, of course, in business administration. And it was shortly after I got that, I really started in the industry with a local distributor in LA named Central Record Sales Company. Now, Central represented 95% of all the R&B artists and labels of the time. We were the number 3 distributor in the country, and I was responsible for promotion, for sales to jukebox operators, to smaller stores. And we had every star there was, Ruth Brown, B.B. King, everybody, on independent labels, okay? Elvis Presley was on Sun Records. He just started. Now, I was with that company from 50 until 55 when I went national with Imperial Records, where I became national sales and promotion manager. And 2/3 of their artists were white, but I held all their artists, of course. Then at Capitol and Tower Records is where I dealt mostly with English artists. I'm the one that signed up and brought to America Pink Floyd. I don't know whether you're familiar with the group. You're familiar with the group Pink Floyd. And I had Tom Jones records in the charts for Tom Jones. Freddie and the Dreamers was an English group I had #1 record on. That's why I met a guy named Mike Curb. Yeah. I set a production deal with him. He was a young kid, 17 years old.
You definitely had a very high-profile career. At any time, did you ever feel discouraged at some moments being the only African-American executive at some of those companies?
No, there were other African-American executives in the industry, but not in the major companies. They were with Atlantic Records, which is a very big company, Chess Records, all the independent companies. But the major companies, Capitol, Columbia, at that time, the major companies were Capitol, Columbia, Decca, RCA, and I think those were the big 4 at the time. It's the type of thing I've been asked many times, how did you feel being the first executive of a major record company? It meant nothing to me. I wasn't even aware of it. I was doing what I always did. I felt if I had something, if I had a chore to do, I did it, and I did it to the best of my abilities. And I had confidence in myself. I felt no one knew the business any better than me. But I think, of course, this may be rationalization, but perhaps if things had been different in society, maybe I should have been president instead of vice president.
Yes. I want to know, what was it like, you growing up in the South and then moving to LA, and as part of your business, sometime having to travel back to the South, and things were different. What was that experience?
You know, it's interesting you should ask. I think I sent Dr. Trout a profile where I pointed out some of these things that had happened to me. When I first went to Imperial Records as national sales manager, sales and promotion manager, and I had independent distributors in all parts of the country. The owner of the company was a guy named Lou Chudd. He said, "Eddie, I don't want you to go any place unless you can fly first class, stay in first class hotels." This was in 1955. There were very few people flying first class and very few African Americans flying first class. But this is the way he wanted it. But I had a chance to meet a lot of my southern distributors at conferences in Chicago and New York, Atlantic City, and a lot of times my distributors would come to the West Coast. Now, they were selling a hell of a lot of records for me. And so I said, I'm going to visit my southern distributors. So the first two I chose to visit was Miami. I don't know the exact year, but I know it was Miami and then Atlanta. I went to Miami. I had no difficulty. I was there a couple of days. The guy who owned the distributorship had previously been an A&R man at King Records, and he had recorded a song that I had written and became #1 in the country called Hearts of Stones by a group named the Charms, and the Fontaine Sisters, and 2 or 3 other people in the country field became #1. Well, he was aware of me, and so he, I guess, sort of shielded my visit to where I would have no problems. I go to Atlanta, and when I come out of the airport, my distributor had already set up a hotel for me on Atlanta University. It was called, during those days, Atlanta, the University Motel at Atlanta University. And I couldn't get a cab. And a sky cab, a black African-American sky cab, says, you have to get a black cab driver, and they're all gone now, but I'm getting off shortly. Where are you going? And I told him. He says, I'll take you there. And he did. The next morning, my distributor sent her promotion man over to pick me up, took me to the distributorship, and we all had breakfast together at the distributorship. Then the promotion man for my distributor was a white guy, and then we started making the rounds to all the radio stations. I had records by Rick Nelson, by Fats Domino, new releases, Fats Domino, a kid drummer from the West Coast who was very hot named Sandy Nelson, which I had produced, and one other record, I think it was a thing called Mother-in-Law by Ernie Cato, I believe it was, out in Toussaint, produced out of New Orleans. What he did, when we go to stations, around noon, lunchtime, we go to this station, I think it was on the campus of Georgia Tech University, and the DJ there said, anybody hungry? Look, why don't we send down to this deli down the street? They have some great, great sandwiches down there, so we can continue our interesting conversation. They did that in order not to embarrass me. That's the way they handled it. A year later, I got a call from Gwen, my distributor, Gwen Kessler, and she, Eddie, when you gonna come visit us again? She was at the airport to pick me up. She took me down to the first class hotel in Atlanta. She took me out to a French restaurant to dinner. Everything had changed. That's just one example of one scene. They did really try to protect me.